guys for joining us. I see a lot of new faces, faces that we haven't seen before. Some of the people in the building, different companies that came out to join us. So we thank you for coming, and different staff from different centers. So we really appreciate your presence. Your presence is integral to these conversations. So we're thankful for you coming out. What is the purpose of these cafes? These cafes are designed to explore the fullness of the human experience, to provide the critical lens and the critical language in which to dismantle attitudes of bias that lead to actions of bias. That is the function of these cafes. We invite panelists to come out, to share their expertise, to share their specialties, so that we can walk away with a better understanding of different perspectives. So we're thankful for you coming out and supporting that effort. This is an opportunity for us to come together, to break bread, to listen, and to commune, to learn together. So thank you for that. This month's theme is Hispanic Heritage Month. We're going to honor our identity, honor our heritage, and the implications it has for building our future. So each one of our panelists has something to contribute, a unique perspective. We have academics, entrepreneurs, salespersons. We have a range to share with you. So let's talk a little bit about Hispanic Heritage Month. Hispanic Heritage Month is where we began, and it's one of our signature cafes because it represents so many of the people who work in the coalition, who work in the community in which we serve, and a growing population that we have nationally. One cannot separate Hispanic and Latino identities from the American fabric because it is a fundamental thread of the American society. The Spanish established some of America's oldest cities, St. Augustine in 1565, up 95 if you've ever visited. Some of the missions that became some of the largest cities in California, San Francisco, Sacramento, and others. And of course, the cities, cultures, and empires of the indigenous people who we cannot leave out, who compose a part of the Latino identity, have been in the Americas for millennia. Politically, Hispanic Americans have served in Congress back to 1822 and have been a part of every war since the Civil War. Presently, the Hispanic population is 57 million people with a $1.5 trillion purchasing power. Simply, the richness of the Hispanic and Latino contribution cannot be contained in a single line, but touch on every facet of American life, from politics to cuisine, language to music, economics to our social conscience. While the name Hispanic Heritage Month privileges connection to Spain, in this cafe, we include the fundamental aspects of Hispanic Heritage Month with both heavy nods to the indigenous influence and African influences as well. And with that, I open our cafe and would like our panel to introduce themselves.
Hello, everyone. Is it on? Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Beautiful audience, really beautiful community that I see here. My name is Yvonne Rodriguez. I am co-owner of YR Public Relations with my sister over there. And we also own a cigar company called Tres Lindas Cubanas Cigars. Thank you. Happy to be here.
All right. My name is Tony Cherez. I'm your South Florida Lakeshore Regional Manager. I wouldn't be a salesperson if I didn't quickly say Lakeshore is the largest provider of innovative, high-quality educational materials, classroom supplies, classroom furniture, over 60 years in business. But a little bit about myself. My legal name is Jose Antonio Chaidez. A lot of people don't know that. It's a very powerful Mexican name, like Antonio Banderas. But my grandmother, a long time ago, started calling me Toñito, and that's where Tony comes from my middle name. Toñito was not going to stick in high school. I was not going to let that happen. So Tony is what we went with. And I am of half Mexican, half Puerto Rican descent. Born and raised in Chicago, have less than 5 years of Miami experience under my belt. So I'm excited to share with you my perspective of what I've gotten used to in such a short time. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Yarelis Mendez Zamora. I am the daughter of Nicaraguan immigrants. I recently graduated from the University of Florida, and I am a writer for the Huffington Post. I am a part of Latina Rebels and multiple other organizations that serve to empower our Latino, Hispanic, and Latinx youth.
Good afternoon, everybody. Buenas tardes. My name is Corinna Mabius, and I've lived here in Miami for 10 years, but previous to that, I lived in other Latino communities. I live actually in Little Havana. But I've also lived in Washington, D.C. and in Southern California. I'm an anthropologist, and I'm deeply involved in my neighborhood as a tour guide and a walking tour guide of cultural and educational tours. And I also co-authored a book called The History of Little Havana.
Good afternoon, everyone. So happy to be here. Such distinguished panelists. My name is Yvette Rodriguez. As my sister told you, we're twins, and we own Wire Public Relations. We're publicists, and we have our cigar line, Tres Lindas Cubanas Cigars.com. I'm a first-generation Cuban-American. Both my parents are Cuban, and both Black Cuban. And just so happy to be here to share my experiences and, to hear you guys out and et cetera. Thank you. Also, a University of Florida graduate, go Gators.
Okay, perfect. So let's jump right in, okay? First question. Given Miami's unique multi-ethnic mix and various hierarchies, what does it mean to be Latino or Hispanic in the Miami context? And how are these identities performed?
I feel that how it feels to be a Hispanic in Miami, for being Cuban American, it's really kind of, Cuba part two, It's for me, it's been very comfortable completely. And I've assimilated living in a very Cuban household, Spanish speaking, eating. My dad doesn't speak English still, they've been here for over 40 years. You know what I mean? My mother went on to graduate from the University of Florida, et cetera. But I think that it's very comfortable, especially now. I feel very comfortable living in Miami. As far as being a Black Cuban, there are plenty of Black Cubans in Cuba and also here. But just in my experience, anyways, the mixing of the Black race with the Hispanic, it's been something that it's not like annoying. But I get asked on a daily basis, oh, you speak Spanish? Oh, can you say something in Spanish? But, that's part of my life, and I'm not going to, if I was going to take it negatively, I wouldn't go, I don't want to go there. It'll be, forget about it. It's on a daily basis. But I think that, there's many obstacles, but I use it to my benefit completely. Being Black, being Cuban, I use it completely to my benefit. And, just if somebody asks, I let them know. So I don't know if I answered or went off.
That's okay. That's okay. Karina?
Michelle, you said performing, right? Yes. Performing our identities. And I think one of the challenges that folks have in our Latino community is you may have immigrated here, for example, from somewhere else where you had a particular way of identifying yourself in a way that people understood you to be. So I know folks who are from the Dominican Republic and who may have not really thought of themselves as Black or even really thought of their any African heritage, but then they come here and they're being identified over and over again in a different kind of a way. So having to negotiate that, maybe you come from Honduras, and then you come here and you kind of for the first time, get this idea of Central American identity that you didn't have before, you see? And I think there's also these tensions that occur where sometimes you face being identified based on, oh, you're Cuban, but then, and then these ideas that folks may bring, like, oh, all Cubans are like this, or all Cubans are politically like this, or all Cuban. No, there's huge diversity within every group, like if you keep going in. And I think it's a struggle as folks are always having to deal with the way other people are identifying them in a different kinds of contexts, right? But also how you want to identify yourself. And in different times and spaces where you're at, you want to feel like an insider, but that can be hard to negotiate being an insider. Sometimes you're constantly being placed over and over again as an outsider.
Yadi?
To speak a little bit more on that, being a Latina in Miami is very comfortable because you have reggaeton blaring down the streets, you hear salsa, merengue, you see people who look like you, who talk like you, and who understand your experiences. You don't have to explain yourself more. But once you move outside of Miami, all of that changes. And suddenly you are other, and you realize just how otherized you are when people find you exotic and people suddenly want to touch your hair even more. And it happens. And how they can't pronounce your name, but here it's all good. Everybody knows how to pronounce your name. And one of the things that's really interesting is how we perform these identities in Miami, right? So my mom crossed the border, and I like to say that after that, we've all been crossing borders, these cultural borders, these racial borders. We live in these borderlands, like Gloria and Saldúa said. So it's interesting and it's hard. But it's something that we live with and that we survive through.
So to kind of share, like I was saying, with what I'm used to in Chicago and coming over here being newer to Miami, in Chicago I learned growing up the different segregated neighborhoods. So as an example, Humboldt Park is predominantly populated by Puerto Ricans. Little Village is predominantly populated by Mexicans. And though there's similarities here in Miami, like Little Havana and Dora Alzuela, right? I learned that one recently, Dora Alzuela. Miami is unique as it welcomes diversity. So when I think about Latino or Hispanic, I think it's too broad of a term, being that the Hispanic population comes from different races and nationalities. And they migrated here for this brighter future, right? And when I think about my grandmother as an example, she moved here in the 30s from Puerto Rico to Chicago. And my mother followed shortly thereafter, a couple years later, at the age of 7. And my mom always wanted the best for us. She married a Mexican and loves the Mexican culture and Mexican, food and music. And I followed in the same suit because I married a Mexican as well. I love my tacos. But I say that because when I think about what we want for our children and taking that from the perspective of my grandmother that migrated from Puerto Rico to Chicago, we always want something better. Right? And I think about that. My mom wanted the best for me, and she was the first to graduate from college in our family. And my sister and myself, there was no other option. We were going to college. We were going to work very hard. We were going to be successful in what we do. I think about my 4 daughters being born in the U.S., not knowing anything different. They have to do better than me. I expect nothing but the best for them in work, in school, in education. I expect them to change the world. And I believe in Miami that identity exists here, and we have our job to perform and do that.
Awesome. Beautiful. Thank you. So you talked a lot about identity, how identity is malleable. It changes from place to place. How does the use of identity inform the work that you do? You're an anthropologist in your business. How does your identity play out in the work that you actually do?
Yeah. Can I answer?
Sure.
No, they're not giving me a chance to answer. I think that identity, I was born and raised in Miami. So I really believe that Miami, I'm not saying that it's a perfect place to live, but it's a perfect example of like the ideology supposedly of the United States, that it's people coming from other places. Because we have here not only necessarily Hispanic, like as far as that kind of ethnicity, but a Caribbean vibe throughout. Like there's a lot of salt water here, we're all affected good. It complements us, the salt water. But I think that as far as even in my personal business, that we're in cigars, in the cigar business, that it is highly populated by like white Cuban older men. So then us popping in, we look like we're the only black-owned cigar company in the nation. And female-owned, it's just a continuous, and we figured that out later on into the business. So for us, we walk into a cigar shop and we look like none of them, at all. They don't even think that we smoke cigars. So it's, you're walking in to sell your product and they don't even assume that you smoke cigars, that's like the worst image for a sales rep, that you have to prove, is a constant proving to yourself and proving to yourself. And like my sister mentioned earlier, that we use it to our advantage, because somebody could say, oh, you have a lot of negatives towards you, I mean, I'm just, for example, in my industry, you have a lot of negative towards you because you're a woman in the cigar industry, you're black in the cigar industry, you're Afro-Cuban, that everybody is like hard for them to understand that, but we use it towards our advantage. We walk in and we don't look like anybody else, we know exactly what we're talking about. Obviously you have to know the business, you have to stay sharp and to highlight. So we're constantly celebrating ourselves, and that has attracted consumers, other businesses to work with us. We've stayed real, and when we leave out of Miami, in Miami we could blend in well. We leave out of Miami, and it's like I don't know, we must look exotic. I know I look exotic. I don't know about that. But they want to touch our hair, everybody, and that's across the line, black and white. As far as races, everybody wants to touch us or speak. And this and that. We were in Detroit. It was like the best looking thing in Detroit. But no, we do use it to our advantage, and we celebrate it. We don't dull it down, and we don't overhype it up either. We are what we are. Nice. Thank you.
Corina?
I would say in my work in Little Havana, it's been very interesting for me because I live there, and like I said, I do these tours for people from all over the world, and also for school kids and college students, etc. But I find a lot of folks opening up to me because they can't place me in a particular kind of way. Like they don't have to be afraid to talk to me about some of the tensions that they're feeling, the racism or ethnocentrism that they're dealing with. And one thing that I think that I hear a lot about is this feeling of a certain hierarchy or kind of power relations. And I find that there's a lot of, we can kind of celebrate multiculturalism, right? But that doesn't take away that there's, that we deal with, we're in a very racially segregated region, city, state, but you see it very, very pronounced. I mean, look in the South, look in the North, but that also affects our Latino, our Hispanic community, but it doesn't get talked about enough. Mm-hmm. It's portrayed, racism is often portrayed as between it's a white Anglo thing and a black African American thing, and yet there is persistent racism. So I see that because sometimes folks will perform that kind of racism in front of me without thinking that I'm kind of like, whoa, what's going on here? And then people will disclose to me about it. So I think that that's something that we need to have more conversations about. Absolutely. And to address.
Absolutely. Excellent. So speaking about the other voices, I think I mentioned earlier that when we talk about Hispanic Heritage Month, it kind of privileges our connection to Spain. How can we further empower indigenous identities, indigenous contribution, and Afro-Latino contributions to Hispanic Heritage Month?
So one of the first things that we have to do as a community is accept the fact that we are really anti-Black. When you look at our language, I mean, I know that I grew up personally hearing, hay que mejorar la raza. You have to better the race. And with my hair, it was, tienes pelo malo. You have bad hair, and you have to straighten it in order to be beautiful. So you have all of these things that are just inherent, and it's due to a lot of our history dating back to colonialism. It's a lot of us wanting to appear to be the better, more easily accepted minority. So the first thing you have to do is accept that. And then you can take steps to start bettering community relationships. You have to, number one, give the mic over to Afro-Latinos and Latinxes. You have to. Because if they aren't given the chance to speak, then what are you doing?
Nice. You mentioned the term Latinx, and I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with this term. So could you please expand on Latinx?
Yeah, sure. So the Spanish language is very, very genderized, for lack of a better word. Mm-hmm. It's very much male, female, la mesa, el hijo, So what happens with people who don't fit those gender binaries? What happens when you have somebody that doesn't want to conform? So that's where the X comes from. When you have these individuals who don't want to perform any of these identities and say, hey, you want to know what? This is what I am. And that's such a powerful term because it comes from these individuals. It's not a term imposed on us like Hispanic was during the 60s as a term to use to market to our community. But rather, this is coming from the inside out.
I like that. I like that. So I'm going to be using Latinx from now on, no more Latino. You convinced me. Knowing the national narrative of the United States and the power of the 57 million strong of people of Latin descent in the United States, how are they impacting the national narrative?
Well, I think about the Latin Hispanic race, and I think about how large a minority we are, and we absolutely impact the outcome of elections, right? We absolutely impact the outcome of policies and laws. But to change it to an early childhood perspective, over time, the U.S. has made caring for family more of an industry than family responsibility, and the Latino community has always valued family, right? We can add a great deal to this movement, I think, by making families the center again and helping out with that. And I bet you all know a Hispanic or two that works very, very hard to earn their share and sends their money outward to be able to help their family out. And I think about my mother again. I keep bringing back my mom. My mom, I'm going to show this to you. I'm going to send you this link so that you can see this. But since the day I moved to Miami, I've been trying to get my mom to move over here as well. I'm like, South Florida is the place to be. You're going to fit right in. That Latin culture that you're used to in Chicago, it's even better here. You're going to love it. Come on over. The weather's better. But she is working 2 jobs right now to help support grandma and different family members, and she will not leave them, right? As long as she knows there's some kind of need, that family is tight, and she's like, Tony, you were successful, you're on your own, you're independent, the way I taught you to grow up that way, and you don't need me anymore. But the rest of my family does. So she will not leave, and Mom, I know that you're watching this, or you will be watching this. Please come to Miami. I miss you. And on that note, family engagement in early childhood is such a hot topic right now because the nation has realized how important it is, and the fundamentals of a family is important to education, success, the future. And I think, like I said, with the strong values of family that we have in the Latin community, it's our job to move that movement forward.
Awesome.
In terms of politics, I'm thinking about the taco trucks, voting registration, brilliant idea. I think there's a lot of stories. You talked about national narrative. I think that there's a lot of, we've been talking about stories, what stories get told and what stories don't get told. Mm-hmm. So I think in all of our in our homes, in our workplaces, and in general, we need to start thinking about what are the stories we keep hearing over and over again. So, for example, we had Columbus Day, right? Mm-hmm. That's a story, the story of conquest, the story of, discovery. And it keeps repeating over and over again, this idea of discovery and conquest. But what is that missing? And what other kinds of stories are we missing that can contribute to the narrative? And one thing that I think should be recognized from the Latino community or Hispanic community is that in this country, I was talking about segregation. There's been a big taboo there was a taboo, and I think there still is to a certain degree of this idea of racial mixing, right? Intermarriage and all that. But if you look at Latin America, the Caribbean, there has been for a very long time a lot of racial mixing. And I think thinking about one's heritage not by just sort of celebrating one aspect of it, but sort of celebrating the mixing, but at the same time addressing these, the racism and the fact that you can be racially mixed, but it doesn't mean that you have to put, like the Spanish heritage up here and other kinds of, heritage or backgrounds down here. But sort of, I think that's something that the whole United States needs to sort of celebrate, hey.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point that you add, the lessons that we can learn from this heritage versus the negatives that we often highlight.
Yes. Something also that I wanted to mention that in these past couple of years, and I'm saying 2 to 3 years, is like alternative media has helped us have a voice also, like the Huffington Post, like other means, Madame Noir, different means of communication. Because they are giving us a voice that it may not be in the mainstream, because to the mainstream we don't exist. Everybody on this panel basically doesn't exist in the mainstream media, or in TV, or in anything. So then nobody is even used to seeing us. So then with these different kind of outlets, and everybody's looking for alternative outlets also, that they give views into lifestyle, opinion, and other types of journalists are in the mix, non-traditional forms also, so that people that look like Yareli, people that look like, it's a whole different type of mixing. So I think that that's for the best, and that gives some kind of light into into the diaspora. Thank you.
Absolutely. And how do you use that in your public relations business? How do you use to try to push those voices and give them more visibility? Yes.
Just being completely genuine and just being who we are. For me, I can identify myself very easily. I'm not around with a poster board saying, hey, I'm this, But just being very confident in yourself. And I wanted to add to what Corinna was saying, and please bring me back to the question. But as far as, especially in my home, it was very strong, very, very strong. You're beautiful, you're smart, like very strong pride in our Cuban heritage, very strong pride in being Black Cuban. Like it started at home. I never heard of anything at school at all. There was nobody like me and my sister in school until we were in middle school old, and it was like another Black Cuban, you know what I mean? But it's like just strong at home, and it's just educating ourselves, and just with your kids, go to just tell stories of your grandmother. Like it could start that easily. But as far as in our public relations business, we focus a lot on art and culture. That's how I met my good friend Corinna. She's a wonderful person, but she's like an example of being open, just being open, meeting people. We like to share with our clients. We specialize in securing media coverage for our clients, but clients with a unique story, with like a unique story, not just, okay, I have a book, but okay, something unique, something out of the ordinary, which of course, that's what everybody thinks that they have. But if you really dig in deep, everybody does have a unique story, but you just got to dig a little bit and stop, everybody's dressed like this, so I'm going to go looking like this. Like it's normal to think to fit in. But in today's day and time, you don't have to fit in, and people are more accepting, but you just have to be open, So, I mean, as far as public relations, it's just trying to be creative constantly. And as far as our cigar line, I'm the publicist for the cigar line, and it's just original. Like, yeah, we're Black, we're Cuban, but I mean African American Black. Not just a Black Cuban. I went to school. I studied a lot of Black history, and that was on my own. You know what I mean? I wasn't taught that at home. You know what I'm saying? My parents didn't know that story. But it's just as digging in and sharing it with people, and then watching documentaries and reading the Huffington Post and reading blogs and etc. But it has to start with you. Really, you can't depend on school at all. School is a wonderful thing, but you can't depend on that, and that's been forever. You're not going to do everything in school. But, PRs are a different story. It's just constantly flipping and, flipping the script, having fun with it, really. I go off, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
You're reminding me of a conversation I actually had earlier today, but about, that it can be, sometimes we get comfortable in our own, in the security of trying to be like everybody else, right? And always sort of imitating, okay, this is the in thing, or this is my comfort zone group that I always hang out with. But one thing that I think is really important, and especially with everybody talking about innovation, you want innovation, learn innovation, to get into that spirit of creativity and openness. You have to take risks, and you have to be open to being uncomfortable, right? Striking up conversations with folks who are quote different from you in some kind of a way, and then once you get into the conversations, you start to realize that regardless of whatever categories you were taught to sort of set up to divide you between other people, that you have some really fundamental things in common, and you can learn from each other. So I think being open to that risk and sort of courageously embracing it, and embracing being yourself unapologetically is extremely valuable.
Excellent. So let's talk a little bit more about the national narrative. Is one side is how you see your identity, another side is how other people position your identity. And with this election, there's a lot of discussion of this. What is the national narrative beyond Miami regarding Latino identity, and what are the effects of this positioning?
Yeah, so there's a lot of fear-based narratives about our community right now. It's a lot of, I refuse to use the word illegal. Why? Because no human being is illegal. What they are is undocumented. So there's a lot of fear surrounding undocumented workers about how they're coming in and stealing our work. But nobody wants to talk about the fact that these are some of the most exploited workers in the United States. Nobody wants to talk about the fact that these are human beings who come home tired, home to their children, and still have time to engage and to invest in their future. So there's that. There's also the myth of, the super sexual Latina. And it's interesting to note that it is the year 2016, and yet most of the actresses, most of the roles that Latinas get are being the housekeeper. So all you see in the movies are women who look like us, who look like me, up on that screen as housekeepers. And my mama's a housekeeper, and I'm not ashamed of her. I'm not, I'm proud of her. But I also know that that's not my future. I got something better ahead, because I need to pull back my community from, so because I know that I need to go back and invest in my community. There's so many fear-based narratives around us about how we're killers, about how we're rapists, about how we don't matter, but yet here we are, and we're surviving and we're striving.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yes. I love it. I love the narrative. Can you share an experience from your work where you've kind of challenged these ideas, these mainstream ideas? Can you share a specific example? I know Corinna well, so I know in your tours that you try to contest the narrative. What ways do you use your work to contest the national narrative?
Well, I keep on repeating myself, but just being completely yourself. And again, being open to different cultures, because as far as working in the cigar industry, we're dealing with people from Georgia in the middle of that I never heard of. Like, they don't even, no email. I mean, of course they have technology, of course. I mean, I'm being sarcastic. But like, we're dealing with people from all over the place, New York, California, Texas, that I never, really had to deal with. But they, like, if you are open, people will be open to you little by little. So that I'm not saying they're gonna invite you over for dinner or anything like that, but there are with my accent, especially, if I get a call over the phone from somebody, a new client or whatever, in whichever business, it's always like, oh, but hold on, but where are you from? You know what I mean? And I know a lot of people that can take that as like a negative, because I must be on another level, because it can annoy anybody. It's on a daily, constant basis. But it's just, they love it. They really do love it, and if they don't, they pretend like they love it. And, as long as they respect me, but I'm respecting them also. I'm learning about them also. Just using whatever you have. I think that's very important. And just being yourself.
Yeah, so to talk about the work that I do, I got to talk about what inspired the work. So I was very, very safe here in Miami, and then I moved to Gainesville, to University of Florida, and it was the first time that I was an other. It was the first time that people looked at me all funny, where did you come from? And I'm never going to forget, I was a sophomore, and I'm an English major. So I was sitting in one of my literature classes, and my professor asked a question. Nobody knew the answer to it. And I raised my hand because I was like, okay, I know the answer. Boom, raised my hand. And I said, oh, okay, Mr. So-and-so or Dr. So-and-so, the name of the book that you're asking for is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Or, I always get the two names confused. So I said the two names wrong. I said the title of the book wrong. And he was like, actually, no, he corrected me. And then he said, I wouldn't expect somebody like you to know that. And I thought, oh, no, this ain't gonna happen. So it was experiences like that that really informed me about, okay, this is how the outside world views it, but this is how I'm gonna challenge it. So I got really involved in my university, and I got really involved outside of it too. And I started writing, because I said, okay, nobody is going to tell me who I am. I'm going to inform them about who I am through my words, through whatever talents I have. So That's how you do it. I say, this is who I am. Nobody is going to change that, and nobody's going to make me feel ashamed.
Excellent. Excellent. Anybody else like to share?
That's awesome. All these stories are awesome. As Nichelle said, I always, on my tours, are trying to sort of challenge some of the taken for granted ways that people may think about Little Havana or think about certain narratives or think about not only the Cuban community, because Little Havana, you know, there's this perception that there's either a perception that it's just a Cuban neighborhood or that no Cubans live there anymore. And both are wrong, you know? And also, that, like I said, and then there's certain perceptions that people might have about, you know, all Cubans are like this kind of stuff. So I'm actually like battling stereotypes, but in a creative way, in a storytelling way, so that people are having those sort of aha moments on the tour. And at the end of it, wow, I never thought about it that way. They're really, and I want them to walk away sort of thinking, well, if that's different than what I assumed, then what else am I assuming incorrectly? And do I need to start questioning and digging deeper about? So I think we have those opportunities, and I also think it's scary. It can be scary, but we also need to address in the water cooler conversations or the conversations at home or the conversations where we hear people perpetuating stereotypes or perpetuating things that we know are wrong. We need to speak out, and we need to it may feel uncomfortable for us to speak out, but we need to not make those conversations so comfortable that they can be perpetuated.
Yeah, can I
Yeah,
add
go
to
ahead.
that? Beautifully said. You guys are giving me life. It really is how you ladies have been mentioning that for us, you know, just being Black alone, it is a wake up and, you know, calculate. You know, you have to be programmed to deal with the elements that are thrown at you on the hourly, hourly. And it depends on where you work. Like Corinna was mentioning, water cooler talk, even now, especially now. I mean, back from Obama, I already was like weeding out, you know, like you started seeing people's true colors, you know. And now with these elections, it is a constant. You guys have no idea. I'm like not even here, you know. I'm like, I have to tune out because I will go crazy every day, you know. And especially like with the clientele that we personally deal with, we're walking into a war zone. You know, every cigar shop that we walk into is against us for the most part, you know what I mean? And we're trying to walk in to sell to them, you know? So it is like, you have to mentally be prepared, you know, in order to not even, when you come across those kind of encounters, to have to explain yourself. But to me, I take it as you're giving them a gift because they didn't know before. So now, like, hopefully you're planting a seed so that they can leave at least with some kind of change at heart or at mind. But I'm not, and besides that, I mean, I don't get paid to write, or I don't get paid to do the community service that should be done at home by parents. But I don't let those opportunities slip me by either, you know? So it is a waking up and programming, you know? Wake up and, okay, and learn, you learn, you know, I consider myself very well, you know, I have my faults, obviously, but like well-rounded. Because I have to walk into every certain situation that is difficult for me, or I walk in looking like, you know, the sore thumb. I have to know how to weave in and out of those situations, and I have to know how to inform people when they do say water cooler remarks, because I'm Black and I'm a Black Cuban. So when I'm amongst Cubans, that's water cooler talk, you know. They forget that I'm Black, you know. So it's like, oh, by the way, listen, you know, you forget. Or they'll say, no, you're not Black, you're Cuban. You know, those kind of things that's offensive if you take it as offensive, you know. But you have to inform those people one way or another, maybe, and not necessarily on an aggressive tone, but they have to be informed. They obviously don't know, because I don't think that anybody in their right mind, I'm sure a lot do, but don't wake up thinking that they want to offend people all day, you know. So like you have to give them light, you know.
I like that. Plant a seed, give them light. I like that idea.
Can I add something real
yeah.
quick, just because you reminded me of a experience that an Afro-Cuban friend of mine told me about. He was applying for a job, and he walked in to get the application from the receptionist, and she didn't realize that he was Cuban or that he understood Spanish, and she happened to be on the phone, and she said, basically in Spanish, well, as soon as this N gets out of the room, he doesn't realize that I'm going to throw that application right in the trash can. Yeah. And he said, hola, paisana, like, and she was horrified. She says, oh, I'm so sorry. I thought you were African American. And he's like, I don't want your job anyway because racist is racist, you know. But it goes to show that there's even though sometimes there are these tensions that are set up between this idea of, oh, African Americans versus Latinos, right? This kind of thing. Well, no, but there's these moments of solidarity or connection and shared experiences, and we must be we must think beyond ourselves, right, in our own situation, and think about how different kinds of oppression and racism, et cetera, extend beyond, right? Absolutely. And call it out in any kind of form that it Absolutely. Takes place.
Absolutely, and I appreciate you bringing back this idea, because I think a lot of times we don't think about the hierarchies that are within cities, and they're very complex. Like, our identities are infinitely complex, and how we relate to one another, and we don't think about those things. We're just moving bodies, and once we're in that position, and you have to kind of negotiate what is happening, what is the context for that happening, and Miami is a very specific context. If I can move back to the idea of planting a seed in hope, what are some of the strides that Latinos have made within the U.S. that have impacted or inspired you the most?
Yeah, so currently we have a Latina sitting on our Supreme Court. Props to Justice Sonia Sotomayor, because that is inspiring. We have people who have won awards all across everything. You have you have people in our government like Luis Gutierrez, who's constantly fighting for immigrants and their rights. We have people who look like us slowly, for lack of a better word, infiltrating, even though that's not a great word to use right now, but it's going to happen, infiltrating these spaces and creating our own power. I can pick up a book and read Sandra Cisneros and be like, okay, this woman looks like me, sounds like me, she writes like me, Juno Diaz. But what inspires me the most is the everyday survival. Recently, Juno Diaz was awarded something by Hispanic Heritage Month Association, something like that. And he said, we have survived everything. We survived people mispronouncing our names. We survived the diaspora. We've survived centuries of people trying to kill us for, through colonialism. We've survived being denied our dignity. We've survived it all, and we're still here. So those everyday survival stories, that woman who comes home after a 12-hour shift and talks with her children, that man who is awake and working 2 to 3 jobs, making sure that he provides for his family back in his native country, those children who are constantly translating for their parents. Because I was that child translating for a very long time for my mom and my dad on the phone, negotiating with the bank and things like that. So those everyday survival stories inspire me.
Excellent. Thank you. Well said.
Ditto. I mean, in addition to what you were talking about, which is the incredible contributions of Hispanics, Latinos in different institutions, I would also add academia. It's fantastic. I am finishing my PhD at Florida International University, and I've had some amazing professors. I feel very blessed by the education I've been receiving. But those everyday experiences, I live in Little Havana, and I live in the barrio of Little Havana, and every day, the connection, Honduran neighbor who, hands over fresh home-cooked meal across the fence, the trading of mangoes for sour oranges, the when I walk down Calle Ocho, the way I feel like I have a million uncles, aunts, cousins, brothers, sisters giving me hugs and calling me from across the street. I mean, that kind of connection is deeply powerful, and in addition to the commitment and the resilience that you were just talking about, which is just an example for, I think, for many people to follow.
Excellent. So many here are in the early education field, and we would like to know, and Tony, if you would like to comment or bring some contributions, since this is your background, in what ways can we make sure that Hispanic families are able to bring their children into a narrative where they are able to learn about their heritage within the early education system? How can we be more inclusive to Hispanic families?
Well, I think it's absolutely important for the Hispanic parents and families to be able to show them that they're included from the beginning. A lot of times they come from different societies where there's political turmoil and they feel like they don't have a voice. And you come here and you have the opportunity to teach all Hispanics, all Latinos, that your voice matters here. And I think teaching that with our children is so absolutely very, very important. I also think it's important in our classrooms and in education to be able to show themselves, and when I say themselves, that Hispanic being, that persona in the classrooms, in art, in dolls, in dramatic play, in stories, being able to see them in faculty and staff, in roles of leadership, to be able to have them identify with themselves and say, my voice is as equal as any other voice that's out there. So I think that's very important in that for children. And then the different movements that are out there across the country, as an example, STEM. Being able to say, I want my child, my Hispanic, Latino child, to grab a hold of STEM because that's activity-based and it's going to be able to give them that love to be able to know that in the future, careers are important. I'm going to start thinking about that now at an early age and position my child to be successful in the future as a powerful voice in the Latin world.
Absolutely. Excellent.
I used to work at what is now Catalyst Miami, and they've had this parent leadership institute. I think what you were saying, Tony, is so important about sort of the civic engagement in different kinds of ways, but from a young age and to parents as well. I have worked as a consultant in the urban planning profession, and one of the challenges, I would say across the country, and in Miami included, is you have these decisions, important decisions being made about the planning of neighborhoods and cities and regions, and not enough Hispanics and Latinos are at the table. And part of it is language differences, but part of it is also this fear of, wow, the setup of the meeting might be such that it's intimidating. It's like I've never gone up and given public comments before. So I think it's also incumbent on us, especially those of us who are bilingual or can talk to the folks planning these kinds of meetings to say, you have to rethink how you're doing outreach. You need to go to churches or houses of worship, for example, or to community centers, not wait for people to come to you. And I think we need to sort of transform, because if it's not been working, then something needs to change, because more people need to be at the table when these kinds of important long-term decisions are being made.
And if I could add to that a little bit, small tangible steps, right? During parent-teacher days, I know that sometimes schools host those. You can have, if, for example, if a teacher doesn't speak Spanish, you can have a Spanish translator there. Make sure that those are always available. Make sure that your forms are always in English and in Spanish. Those small, tiny steps to be inclusive in your language. When you're writing a curriculum or anything like that, think about, okay, how am I being inclusive? What are the inherent biases that I carry that my kids can teach me how to overcome? Because it's also important to realize that your students aren't just empty vessels that you can fill up with knowledge. They come with their own experiences as well, and they can teach you in return.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much. We want to turn it over to the floor. If anyone would like to share a comment or ask a question to the panelists. We'd like to invite you to do so at this time.
First, I want to welcome all of you. You guys are all wonderful and very powerful women, and you, Tony, the only man amongst women. I think it's amazing that you guys carry the power within you, and I think that's what needs to start at home with your own children. How do you guys really influence? I know we all try to influence things at a higher level. How do you influence? And how do you bring out that power and that passion that you guys carry on your everyday, normal level, even at home kind of day?
Just a comment. I also mentor high school age girls with an organization. It's called Women of Tomorrow. And it's just for the girls to see. These are it's not inner city. It's all schools throughout Miami-Dade and Broward. And they just have to see, they obviously need an example, that I don't think that it's drilling them with information or lecturing to them. They have to see somebody doing something that possibly looks like them and it's working for them, because the girls that we come across, they don't know anything but the neighborhood that they're going to school in, or their neighborhood, which is a low-income neighborhood. So they don't see what's in Miami. They don't see what you do. They like to know what I'm doing on the weekend. They like, or we'll go on field trips. And this is that we only meet once a month. And we'll go to the Perez Art Museum. And they, you're opening their eyes to different possibilities just right outside of their door, or even the way to speak that we've been telling the girls, like as far as degrading words that are used towards other girls or things that men say to girls. And we're showing them like they have to be empowered and they need sisterhood. They need, they have to know that they have to defend women also, So then I think just walking in and talking to these girls, that we walk in for a little while and that's it. We walk in dressed however, because I work, I could dress whatever I want to work. I could, they see that, and they see that you don't have to be a cookie cutter. Okay, yes, and this and that or whatever. We'll get up and we'll dance with the girls. They have to see that their way of being, they don't have to totally just abandon their lifestyle, that they could complement their lifestyle and enrich their lives and learn to take ownership of their own lives and their own dignity, and know how to defend themselves. But they have to see it, I believe, and with my nieces, I'm the same way.
Anybody else?
Oh, can I just add to that? I just want to say, I think mentorship, like you mentioned, is so important. And I think there are many different ways that can happen. Sometimes it can be an ongoing relationship sometimes, but it doesn't have to be through a formal organization. I have mentored women mostly for the past 20 years, but never through an institution, always just because I've met women who've, after I speak, wow, I really want to learn more. And I see that light in their eyes and I want to bring it out. And so I'll start working with them. We'll have conversations. We just, meet at a coffee shop. So I think it's something that's very accessible. I don't think people should be hindered from a mentoring type of opportunity by thinking, oh, I've got to go through this big, long process to do so.
You don't have to be a mentor only for for people that it's not yours. I mentor at home as well. I push my kids to speak Spanish all the time. They were born here, but we are from Venezuela. So it's a constant fighting with them, because normally they go to school and they are 6 and 8 and they tend to speak English in between them. But as soon as I hear English at home, I say, hey, Spanish, you need to speak Spanish. And it's not only when they're speaking, when they're eating. I cook for them the food that we used to eat in Venezuela. So, and whenever we go out for dinner or something, I try to get something that it's Latin. I mean, they like pollo tropical instead of McDonald's, for example. And that's a way to mentor as well with your own family, and then they can spread that that living experience with whatever they go.
Yeah, I have a question. It's just because I'm a little nosy. And the panelists, and I wanted to ask you, Corina, specifically, because coming from a background that is not Hispanic or Latino background, and going into a medium that is basically for Hispanic, talking about Hispanic culture and backgrounds and stuff like that, have you experienced any bias yourself from the Latin community? Like, and how did you get interested that deep into the roots of Hispanic when you yourself are not a Hispanic? Just
I
curious.
dealt with that actually much earlier in my life when I lived in South Florida. I actually was, I lived in an area where there were a lot of Chicanos, or people who identified as Chicano and Mexicano. And there was a whole 500 years march of resistance march during those times. But I was actually volunteering at this place called La Casa de la Raza. And at first, when I first went there, I remember they were like, who's this white girl, walking in? But over time, I think, I got used to, folks sort of identifying me in a particular kind of way. But, like you said, you're just open about who you are, and you have to be, as a white woman, an American woman, I have to be open about the privilege that I walk with every single day, and that I benefit from in terms of our institutions. But I listened, I learned, I was listening constantly to different stories, and that really shaped who I am. And then again, moving to Washington, D.C. and being very involved and demonstrating a commitment constantly in the work that I did, in my social life, my ability to listen and be inclusive and to bring people into decisions, I think really helped me. By the time I came to Miami, my first job here was director of Viernes Culturales, the monthly festival in Little Havana. But I was actually embraced. And I think, though, that it was this years, earlier, slowly but surely, just learning this negotiation, because I've navigated too. It's like you were talking about this sort of, but I've had to navigate that too. But I haven't let it prohibit me from being able to be an ally. And I think it's very important for folks to think in terms of the possibility for being allies in many kinds of ways. Allies for women, allies for all people of color, allies for immigrants, so I think we can all sort of identify in different ways those opportunities to be an ally and not to be afraid to be an ally.
Man, I do a whole lot. So aside from being a salesperson and doing my job to go into different programs and say, hey, we got the best stuff, come get it. I find myself wearing a hat where I can go in and get down and dirty and not dressed up like this and get a little sweaty and build stuff and get in a truck and help programs to clean different things up right after a hurricane that may have come and hit us. I find myself doing training and in professional development and helping to inspire and teach people things they may not know, and at the same time putting myself in a position where I'm learning those same things, I find myself, being a better Latino. So just to quickly jump on that really, really fast, I identify with what you just said. I was born and raised in Chicago. Our first language in our house was English, right? So when people are speaking English or when they speak Spanish to me, I translate it to English in my head. I get my response ready. I translate it back to Spanish. Then it comes out my mouth, and then people get it, right? So when I think about that in Chicago, I had my daughters with me, right? We grew a little bit more. I have more daughters now. I keep making them. But here in Miami, I'm realizing and understanding that I'm a little late to the game, but I got to make sure that they're bilingual when they grow up. I got to make sure that they have that chance to succeed, not just in that English language, but have a chance for double the success, the chance to communicate, the chance to not lose their heritage and their culture. So I'm very thankful for what I do in the field every day, because I get that opportunity to be inspired by everyone around me and being able to learn from the educators that are out there that it is important to raise my children as professional bilingual children.
I like that, double the success. I like that.
Okay, so currently I'm the digital community coordinator for Centro Campesino Farm Worker Center. And so what that means is that I help out with their digital content, so creating blogs and the like. I'm also a part of Latina Rebels, which is an online platform where we have around 80,000 likes combined and a reach of around 1 million people daily. And so what we do is that we shed light on these stories. We talk about our culture, what it means to be Latina, what it means to be Latinx, what it means to constantly be learning and unlearning systems of oppression. So that's a little bit about what I do. I'm also a writer for the Huffington Post, so I love writing. That's one of the ways that I de-stress and I negotiate everything that's going on in my life. And yeah.
That's your superpower. Okay. Yeah, no, I think.
Well, I already mentioned that I do walking tours, and I'm also finishing my PhD. But on walking tours, people contact me, and I try to do some things very multisensory. So when they're but I try to help folks think about history and connect it to the present. So we'll start with our cafecitos, right? But then it gives a conversation about sugar and the history of sugar, but also diabetes in our communities. Like, I really connect it. I mean, but we got to think about these things. So I'm trying to do it. And then azúcar, I can also talk about Celia Cruz. And that a lot of folks don't realize that, but in Domino Plaza, where it says azúcar, is honoring the fact that Celia Cruz performed there. So all these sort of references. So it's like helping people sort of, but when I do those tours, it's also an opportunity to get people to think differently about whatever neighborhood they're from, and to start thinking about what are the stories that I can find and learn from my neighbors, or maybe I need to actually walk into that bodega that I've never been into before, and wow, it's really cool, and maybe I should try some of this stuff out. And so I want people to have a lot of takeaways, but I really, really love it, and my dream is to be a professor.
Excellent. Well, we thank you for joining us. I wanted to offer the panel if you had any final thoughts that you would like to share, or any final thoughts from the audience. Comments? Yep.
Can you? Okay. So I'm listening to all of you speak, and it brings to mind, because you've said several things about privilege. You've also discussed comfort, and obviously, we've discussed race. And I am wondering if any of you feel that it's particularly challenging to have these conversations here in Miami because of what you described, because of the comfort, because of the privilege. Eduardo Bonilla Silva describes the racial stratification of the United States from becoming just a dichotomous system where we see blacks and whites, and I think you guys discussed that, to a middle section called honorary whites.
Yes.
And I think for those of you who aren't familiar with that, it basically means that several cultures who can easily assimilate through their phenotype or their ability to acquire language into the dominant society, which is, white male, can obtain some sort of, status or power. So a lot of Hispanic or Latinos here in Miami have been able to obtain that invisible title of honorary white. And I like to count myself in that group because of the education that I've obtained and because of the privilege that I've grown up living here. I don't ever walk into a room and wonder, is someone looking at me? Do I look too Hispanic? Am I too Latina for this room? I don't ever think that. I feel more intimidated when I walk into African American spaces. And I know that's uncomfortable to state, but it's true because I feel like in African American spaces here in Miami that are very segregated, we are white. The Latino community is considered white. So my question, I guess I'm going back around to it, do you find it particularly difficult to have these conversations and to engage the Latino community when it comes to this national narrative about Latinos? Do you find it difficult to bring them all together because so many of us have been able to obtain the title honorary white?
Yeah, so I'll definitely jump on that question because I love it. Thank you so much for asking it. So Miami is a bubble. It is this bubble of, like we were all saying before, of comfort, of privilege. And it is so hard to have these conversations. And it is so hard to get people to realize that what they're striving for, what they want, is that title of honorary white. Yeah. In Miami, people will shut it down and say, no, but, not here, not me, not I. And once that happens, it's so hard to pull them out. And they're going to need to have that wake-up call, that reprogramming to realize, oh, my God, like there is a bigger world out there and I may not exactly be a part of it. So those conversations that we say are so crucial to have. Sometimes even I personally don't know how to start them in Miami. Up in Gainesville, I knew how to start them, anywhere. But here, it's all great. I know how to start these conversations. I know how to engage people and all these other things. But in Miami, to get people to be able to walk away from that is so hard.
Oh, yeah. Can I say something?
Yeah. Of course.
It's not only hard, it's nearly impossible to get someone to admit to their own background or whatever, everybody has a little bit of black in them. Everybody has a little bit of, but I think that has to do also with the stigma in their countries, in South America, in the Caribbean, that's like something that people are like trying to like get away from, if it's like, I don't know, a disease or something, that they have some kind of intermingling of races, or because like you're mentioning that Miami's a bubble. Once you leave Miami, everybody's a Mexican, they assume that everybody's a Mexican, but
Okay.
a lot, but as far as and I'm Cuban, the Cubans in Miami, they don't notice that once they leave Miami, that more than likely they'll try not to leave. But once you leave Miami, you're in the boat with the rest of us, you just have that privilege here. But they, I have no, and this is on the record, I have no hope for, I don't know what possibility there is, what superpower there is to change their mind. It has to, I think that they have to know about their history and their family tree and their last names, because a lot of last names and a lot of names don't only come from Africa. They come from it's a lot of Islamic last names, a lot of or names, or even that they don't even know, but they will judge from here out. But they don't know that their grandmother. It's just very difficult. And like I keep mentioning, I can't you can't teach them all. But I know that I can walk in, and I know I could walk in and out with my own dignity and leaving on a good note for myself. That's up to you, But no, yeah, that white privilege, that wannabe white privilege, it's a forever. I don't even know, and it's kind of against them because once they leave Miami, they're up against the reality of life, like you were mentioning in Gainesville. In Gainesville, they don't play that,
Absolutely.
The people that I went to high school with, or whatever, they go up to an area that is not populated by Hispanics, and they are outnumbered, and they kind of relate to us that we were black, that we've always dealt with it from Miami, you know. But no, I don't have any hope for it.
I do have hope because I have seen folks shift in their views.
That's awesome.
But I have to say, education. When you really start to study the histories of the U.S., of Latin America, of the Caribbean, then you have to interrogate some of these things. And I'm not talking like the quote whitewashed history that unfortunately is in a lot of published textbooks. But I'm so glad that you mentioned Eduardo Bonilla Silva is an amazing sociologist, and he's published a number of really excellent books talking about race and ethnicity and this honorary whiteness here in the United States. He has a really great perspective, I think, to bring. But I have to say, our younger generation, that's where I see some of this hope and this possibility, because even if sometimes they're dealing with grandparents or parents who might be very set because that's what they learned. And that's an identity that they don't want to give up, especially having benefited from this privilege for so many years. But I find that young people are sometimes in their families or in other kinds of things, helping to shift these conversations, asking questions that haven't been asked. And so that's why the work that all of you do is so important, because let's help ensure that that in their educational opportunities that they are hearing and helping to shape multiple stories.
Absolutely. It always comes back to education, and then early, right? And we're having these conversations, Tony mentioned earlier STEM, but we also need to include these conversations of the social sciences from a very early on so that they can learn these ideas because they're up against it from the moment they're born. We thank everybody for coming out. We just want to mention our next CAFÉ is November 17th. It'll be the post-election 2016 CAFÉ.